starting out with Cathy Jordan from the University of Minnesota, and you have a huge resume, and I don't have it, memorized, but PhD, that's a big deal. So I'm going to have you come up, and then you can share more about your background and talk a little bit more about, how nature impacts mental health for children. Thank you so much. Let's give her a welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. So I am Cathy Jordan. I am a pediatric neuropsychologist by training, although I have not practiced clinically in about 20 years. My favorite job, part of my job, is that I'm the research director for the Children in Nature Network, a national nonprofit connecting kids and families and communities to nature. I'm also a professor of pediatrics at the University of Minnesota and a senior scientist at the U's Masonic Institute for the Developing Brain. That's a really long mouthful. But anyway, it's great to be here this morning. So let's start with what we know about the kids. So how are the children? What do you think? Are they doing well or not so well? Not so great. Although, to be fair, 78% of early childhood kids, like 6 months to 5 years old, exhibit all 4 indicators of flourishing and well-being. These are things that are like quality relationships with the parent, appropriate emotional regulation, things like that. And then from 6 to 17 years old, many are still flourishing, although the rate is a little bit lower. It's dropped to 60% who are exhibiting 3 rather than 4 of those indicators appropriate for their age. Things like interest in learning, task persistence, emotional regulation. But mental health problems start to creep in as kids get older, and there are some patterns. So federal data from 2022 to 2023 showed that mental disorders, they can have their roots in early childhood. They affect a range of sociodemographic characteristics, although kids from lower income families and marginalized or minoritized backgrounds fare worse. During this 2022-23 period of time, the most prevalent disorders diagnosed amongst U.S. kids and adolescents 3 to 17 years old were anxiety, behavior problems, and depression, in that order. And girls showed the more internalizing, like the depression and the anxiety, and the boys showed the more behavioral disturbances. The rates of mental health issues then take a jump up in the teen years, and amongst U.S. high school kids in 2023, 40% reported some sort of persistent feeling of sadness or hopelessness in that last year. 20% reported seriously considering attempting suicide in the past year. 16% reported making a suicide plan in the past year. And what do you think that 9% was? Or attempted anyway, actual attempts. 9% of teens in the United States attempted suicide in 2023. That's pretty sobering. And then COVID hit, and things got even worse. This is a great way to start a conference. Pandemic era reports, recently the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and the Children's Hospital Association issued a joint declaration of a national emergency in child and adolescent mental health. Compounding that mental health issues of this generation of kids is a rise in the use of technology and social media, and the impact of kind of increasingly toxic climate on social media, and then the anxiety, the fear, the hopelessness of kind of mounting planetary crises. These are kind of the 2 big things that are really affecting kids' mental health, as well as all sorts of other things that are going on in their lives. At this point, 20% of children have an identified mental health condition annually, and 40% of all kids will meet criteria for a mental health disorder before the age of 18. So how can nature help? Research shows that a connection between nature, or a connection to nature, increases positive mood, it lowers stress levels, kids focus and pay attention better, they have feelings of restoration and rejuvenation, they have better emotional and behavioral regulation, boosts in creativity, overall just feeling a greater sense of well-being and feeling good about their lives. So then the question is, why does nature have these impacts? What are the mechanisms? And there are a few interrelated sort of classic theories I'm going to share with you, and then there's all sorts of burgeoning hypotheses and research that are pretty exciting that just aren't quite ready for prime time, or we don't have enough time, but I'm going to talk about the three classic ones this morning. So underlying everything, at least evolutionarily, is something called biophilia, or the love of nature. The biophilia hypothesis says that our ancestors relied on the natural environment for their survival, leading to a biological affinity for nature that continues today, like it is embedded in our DNA. We continue to gravitate towards nature when we need restoration and rejuvenation. The attention restoration theory, or ART, says that there are two systems of attention in our brains. One is a directed, effortful, kind of top-down, very intentional system of attention. The other one is a sort of involuntary, effortless sort of attention, and that's the one that nature sort of taps. So what happens here is that you're tired, you're working, kids are studying, they're kind of stressed out from being in class or whatever, and you go outside and that directed, effortful attention system gets to have a little break, while nature just sort of grabs that involuntary system that just sort of, is all about just, oh, cool, that's really great, the wonder that happens in outdoors. And so then when you go back indoors and you have to do that effortful attention, directed attention work again, that attentional system is restored. The stress reduction theory says that just like stressful events get under our skin and affect us neurologically and our stress physiology systems, nature does too, but like in the opposite way. So when we are, aroused, ramped up, stressed out, our sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system is in high gear. Our blood pressure is up, our heart rate is up, those sorts of things. In nature, the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and that's the one that helps us sort of tamp it all down. Decreases our blood pressure, decreases our respiration rate, we don't sweat so much, and it brings down our cortisol level back to a normal level. A study I just want to share with you quickly tested these theories, attention restoration and stress reduction. It was conducted by Lee and Sullivan at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And they did this randomized controlled experiment really well controlled. You can make causal inferences based on this experiment. They had 94 high school kids in 5 different high schools. These kids were assigned to a classroom that either had a window with a natural view, a window that was like a brick wall, or no window at all. And then the kids needed to do something a little stressful, public speaking in front of the researchers, or mental arithmetic, or something like that. And then the researchers tested their attention and their stress, that sympathetic nervous system stuff. And then the kids got to sort of chill out in that classroom with that window condition of build wall, greenery or no window. And then after 10 or 15 minutes or so, they tested their attention and stress again. What do you think they found? Guesses? Which window condition led to what kind of response?
Lower stress in response to nature exposure.
Exactly. So the window views to the green landscape, shown in the green line. That's kind of small, but sorry, that's the photo I could grab. So that green line shows the window view into the green landscapes. That promoted students' attention restoration. That's the graph on the left. And it sped up their recovery from stress. That's the graph on the right. It was quite profound. It also demonstrated that while attention and stress, these theories can kind of interact. If you're really stressed out, you're not going to pay attention very well. But it also demonstrated that these are actually two unique pathways, and that was sort of theoretically interesting. So interacting with nature can happen in a variety of ways and for different purposes. There are ways that nature both promotes mental health before any problems arise, and as well as alleviates mental health symptoms when used as a therapeutic intervention. Sometimes that health promotion and that intervention, they kind of lead together. But whether it's health promotion or intervention, we can experience nature in a passive sort of way, just being around it, viewing it, and we can also actively engage with it in an intentional way through nature play, nature-based learning, nature-based therapy, for example. In terms of passive exposure, growing up in greener neighborhoods is related to a variety of positive outcomes, but the school setting, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because that's really the thing that's most relevant to today's conference. So we just saw how greener views from the classroom support better attention and stress regulation, but bringing nature indoors is also really helpful. Bringing plants indoors, doing indoor activities with, planting seeds or, arranging flowers or, whatever it might be, as well as things like installing green walls or just having a whole bunch of plants in the classroom. Those things also are important for supporting students' mental health. An important form of active engagement with nature is nature-based learning, or NBL. Nature-based learning, as I think about it anyway, is learning in, with, and through the natural environment and natural elements across the curriculum. Learning math, science, social studies, English language arts, the arts, physical activity, or physical education rather, all of these things can be taught and learned through nature-based pedagogical techniques. Research shows that nature-based learning is as good as and frequently superior to classroom-based learning. And in terms of academic outcomes, did I just lose my mic?
Did I just die?
Low battery. If I just talk loud.
Yeah, maybe it was-
Okay. Don't know how to turn that off, so I'm just gonna lay it over there. So even when nature-based learning is only as good as classroom-based learning, the fact that it also supports physical activity, physical and mental health, cognitive function, social emotional skills, executive function, creativity, the development of care for the earth, all these other things that we call co-benefits, that suggests that nature-based learning should really be being applied widely, much more widely than it is now, and across, PK through 12. It is that good, that supportive of kids' development and their health. All of those co-benefits are also keys to understanding why nature-based learning is particularly effective. It's about both the simple exposure to nature as well as the pedagogy itself. Learning in nature, just being in nature, learning without really interacting with it, improves attention, decreases stress. These things support learning and academic performance. And then the teaching approaches that are really characteristic of nature-based learning, things that are active, collaborative, inquiry-based, hands-on, student-led. These are the exact pedagogical approaches that education research suggests are the most effective forms of teaching, regardless of whether they're done indoors or outdoors. And nature-based learning just sort of naturally taps those sorts of pedagogical approaches. Another active engagement practice, and one that's really on point with this conference, is related to mindfulness. So mindfulness, regardless of where it's taking place, and nature exposure have a number of outcomes in common. Reduced stress, improved mood, emotional regulation, sense of well-being, and focus. The neuroscience data is really interesting and shows some parallels between how mindfulness and nature exposure affect the brain. For example, the prefrontal cortex related to attention, executive skills, planning, problem solving, self-regulation, that is activated in both mindfulness and in nature exposure. Something called the default mode network, which is this network in our brain that sort of controls things like what's called self-referential thinking and rumination, not stuff that you like to spend a lot of time doing, that is deactivated in both mindfulness and nature exposure. And then there are similar effects on brain regions and functions that regulate the stress response in our bodies. But there are some ways that they are apparently different. So mindfulness practice requires a bit more of an intentional control process, internal awareness, whereas nature exposure, think attention restoration theory again, that is more of this effortless form of attention. So there are some differences in there that are important. One of the implications meaning they're not the exact same thing, but they could be complementary. And in fact, the neuroscience data suggests that the studies that look at mindfulness in nature suggest that mindfulness practices and outcomes are enhanced when nature and mindfulness are combined. So mindfulness practices can produce more dramatic decreases in stress, deeper focus, even greater sense of emotional well-being when done in natural settings, tapping into that multisensory experience that is easily afforded in nature. It doesn't overstimulate you like an urban scene might. And this is because some of the effects of nature, things like awe and decreased rumination and self-referential thinking and increased self-regulation, these things help you achieve a mindful state more readily. So a consistent long-term mindfulness practice can achieve some of the same things, but some of those impacts are much more readily attained in nature, and so when you combine those two things, thank you very much. Save my vocal cords. When you combine those two things and do the mindfulness practice in nature, it's like nature just really gives mindfulness practice a big boost. So that's something important to remember, particularly if you use mindfulness in a therapeutic sort of way. Okay, I want to make sure that I talk about one additional topic before I talk about some recommendations, because this one is really important and I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. So we talked about this teen mental health crisis. I depressed you early in the morning with some horrible stats about that. But this is co-occurring with another trend, a pretty consistent dip in nature engagement and nature connectedness in adolescence. It's like the worst time that you could become disconnected from nature is right when your sort of mental health issues are ramping up in adolescence. But the question is, could increasing nature exposure and engagement counteract that teen mental health crisis? And some research on green time and screen time suggests that the answer might be yes. So I'm going to kind of walk you through some research about screen time and the influence of nature on that. And the reason that it's related to kind of the mental health crisis is that connection between the screen time and the toxic social media and that sort of stuff, and how that plays into teen mental health. It's not the only reason teens are struggling, but it is one of the important ones. So our Children in Nature Network research team perused the recent Children in Nature literature for one of our monthly research digests, focused on green time and screen time. We did this last winter. And we looked at both the screen time itself literature and then the screen time and green time literature. And so the screen time literature shows that screen time is associated with a number of negative health and well-being outcomes, but that the interplay between green time and screen time is kind of nuanced. And I'm going to walk you through some of the nuances. One of the things that people are concerned about with increasing recreational screen time is that it might be decreasing the time that kids spend outdoors, and consequently those kids miss out on all those benefits of nature. And generally it's true that as recreational screen time increases, the time available for outdoor play and recreation decreases. However, there is an occasional study that shows that that's not necessarily true, and it also matters. Sociodemographics matter, a variety of other things seem to matter, and it isn't always a simple picture. Like for every 30 minutes you spend on a screen, you've got 30 minutes less time, to be in nature. It's not quite linear like that. And it's not just the time available to spend in nature that is the issue. A Canadian national survey showed that screen use may be linked to a decrease in the actual importance of nature in kids' lives, kind of generation over generation. The results show that youth often prefer technology over nature or being outdoors. And that reminds me of, have you guys all read or seen Last Child in the Woods? This book started the Children in Nature movement back in about 2005, or at least rekindled it. Rich Louv also started the Children in Nature Network. He has an interview with a boy and quotes the boy when asked why he preferred being indoors. This boy said, because that's where the electrical outlets are. I thought, oh my God, that's just so, that's so sad. But 20 years later, it's still very true. So the research on screen time and mental health, as well as studies on green time as an antidote, document that screen time increases things like depression and anxiety and stress and poor self-regulation. And the studies on green time and screen time document that green time has benefits. We've talked about nature's benefits on positive mental health, cognitive functioning, academic achievement. And they also suggest that green time can counteract the negative effects of screen time. And this was the most important or most consistent finding that we found in our little literature review, that nature engagement can be this effective buffer for the negative effects of screen time. And if screen time is an important contribution to poor mental health in adolescents, then nature can help counteract the teen mental health crisis. That's the logic here. And this is true across ages, from nature play in toddlerhood to the awe-inspiring experiences in nature that teens get to go on for like a week at a time that might be especially impactful for preventing or reducing internet addiction. There's some research around that. So I mentioned before that this isn't a simple or a linear relationship, and several factors seem to influence the relationship between green time and screen time. One of them is sociodemographics. Higher family income correlates with reduced screen time, increased outdoor time, elevated positive health among children. In another study, it was age, gender, and race that mattered. Screen time increased and connectedness to nature decreased from 6th grade to 8th grade, and girls and African American youth were much more likely to have higher screen times and lower outdoor times and decreased connectedness to nature. We don't think about this one as much, but neighborhood green space is an important factor. There's a US national study of how green space access influences the effectiveness of community screen time reduction programs and policies. And it found that the benefits of these programs and policies were only experienced when there was sufficient and high green space in the neighborhood. That without that green space available, these programs were not particularly effective. So green space access could be a really critical factor that may reduce inequalities in childhood screen time when paired with prevention and intervention programs and policies. And then finally, family attitudes and beliefs are really important in kids' screen time and in counteracting the adverse outcomes of excessive screen time. There was a systematic literature review that looked at how the beneficial health effects of nature exposure interact with problematic screen use across childhood, and how the family system and how parents' roles sort of contribute to that dynamic. That's locked, so somebody can read that, thanks. They found that roles that families play in shaping perceptions and experiences and routines around screen time and nature were really important. For example, children's preferences for screen time and nature are really dependent on the parents' attitudes towards screen time and nature, and whether the parent limits screen time and encourages outdoor time. And then the parent or the adult as a role model is really important. If the parent is, on their phone or, on their screen in the presence of children, particularly younger children, that plays a role in how those children end up practicing screen time habits as well. So Technology doesn't have to be all bad, though. There are situations where integrating technology into nature can sometimes inspire learning, play, and engagement with the nature. Integrating technology in nature can give kids a tool to closely observe, to understand nature. Using their phone camera, they can document aspects of the natural environment that capture their personal interests. They can express their feelings about nature. Apps and social media that facilitate social interaction in the context of nature can be engaging for youth. Sometimes it's about practicality. Kids feel more safe when they've got their phone with them. Parents feel that their worries decrease if they know their kid has their phone. And then allowing devices while in nature within some parameters can help kids shape that outdoor experience in ways that is engaging for them. And sometimes it's just letting them use their phones or integrating phones into that nature experience makes it possible for those kids to be willing to do it versus I'm just not doing it unless I can have my phone with me. So I want to end with some recommendations, overall recommendations. So number one, the more greenery inside and surrounding schools, the better. Greening schoolyards, bringing nature indoors is sort of how you start this whole process. Using nature play, nature-based learning, mindfulness in nature practices routinely to boost social emotional skills, physical activity, social relationships in ways that support learning as well as mental and physical health and counteract the ill effects of screen time. These are really important practices. They work when they're done on a routine basis. Third is to offer forms of nature engagement that boost emotional connections to nature through awe and wonder. And particularly when using technology, make sure that the technology supports the wonder rather than the focus being on the technology itself. The focus needs to be on the nature and technology supporting that engagement with nature. And then adults, like parents and teachers and other adults in schools, can be role models for that awe, that wonder, that love of nature. We call them nature mentors, and they're very important in establishing emotional connections to nature in childhood. And those emotional connections in childhood are really important because emotional connectedness to nature actually predicts well-being throughout life. The fourth is to offer regular, sufficient outdoor recess, not withholding recess for academic or disciplinary reasons. Very few states have actual recess policies, and so districts and schools really need to develop their own policies to make sure that outdoor recess is available every day that it's possible in terms of weather, and for all students. And then finally, for students experiencing depression, anxiety, behavioral problems, trauma, etc., these routine practices are helpful in supporting their mental health, but they may need more. And nature-based therapeutic approaches, which I have not gone into detail, some of which you'll hear a little bit more about today, these things can help those kids that are actually struggling with a mental health disorder. But it is also universally important for all kids because it is a health promotion practice that is supportive of their overall development and really inexpensive. It's not a big, expensive, high staff, kind of intervention. So I'm going to stop there, and I've got 5 more minutes. Maybe I'll give you an extra minute because of the fire alarm. But I want to make sure that you get a chance to ask questions. What's on your mind about kids' mental health and about how nature can support or intervene in mental health?
Is there any information about artificial greenery, like if our office or classroom space doesn't allow a window or anything like that? Is there any positive effects associated with having
Plastic
presence
plants?
of, yeah.
Plastic plants? Plastic plants, not so much, but things like artwork, nature video sorts of things, photographs of real stuff is helpful. It's not as good as the real thing, but it's better than nothing. Yeah. That's why you see nature things in doctor's offices, and, you know, dentists put nature posters on their ceilings and things like that. Other questions? Anything surprising about what I talked about? Or anything you're still wondering about?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So knowing that the screens are like such a detriment, and I get it, there's positive sides to using them, but have you heard any rumblings like nationwide at all about ways to reduce screen use in schools? Because it seems like it's just growing and growing and growing. Like there's no such thing as a whiteboard anymore. It's one of these.
Yeah. You know, technology can be, when done well, can be very supportive of learning. So a lot of this research is more about recreational screen use, not academic screen use. But when you think about it, when kids are on tablets or, you know, whatever they're doing all day long in school, and then they're on their phones or their tablets like the rest of the day, it's like they spend a full-time job, more than a full-time job worth of hours per week on screens. And that can be detrimental. So, you know, educationally, I think, you know, we've had a big sort of reform movement in education around the use of technology, as if technology is really going to be the key to all learning. And I don't agree with that at all, actually. I think it can be supportive, but I think if we over-rely on technology, we are taking away from kids' ability to get out into nature and to do the kind of learning that supports rather than detracts from their mental health, physical health, and social and emotional skills. Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's any research on kids' level of engagement or receptiveness to therapeutic approaches, or even just conversations, school counselors, school social workers, school-based mental health providers, even private, when that's done in a nature setting.
Yeah, there's certainly research on nature-based therapeutic approaches, this decreased stress, the increase in positive mood, the increased self-regulation that happens when exposed to nature plays into the benefits of whatever the other therapeutic approach is that is happening and has been sort of transferred to being outdoors. But then, so that's just like moving the therapy outdoors kind of thing. Just like with learning, you can take your spelling test outside, you can move your journaling outside or whatever. It's not actual nature-based learning. Same with therapy. It's not actual nature-based therapy, but even just doing the therapy outdoors takes advantage of the nature exposure. But then nature-based therapeutic approaches that actually put the child in interaction with natural elements, natural phenomena, can be particularly effective, and taking advantage of things that are about like metaphor in nature. When you get to sort of observe the flow of a river and how that water, you know, sort of moves around a rock, you know, metaphor for the struggles in life and how you're going to sometimes have to kind of sidestep that, or you're going to have to figure out how to get over it, but you, like the water, are going to get to your destination. It might not be a straight line, but you know, water can be a wonderful metaphor. So those sorts of ways of really taking advantage of what the child is observing and experiencing in that therapeutic situation outdoors can really, you know, add to the benefit of the therapy. But even just doing whatever you do normally outdoors is going to have some benefit, just because of the nature exposure. One thing that I can actually send to Sarah to send to the rest of you is some resources that we put together at Children in Nature Network around sort of therapeutic uses of nature. Yeah, provide you with a resource. Other questions?
I just have a comment. I used to teach middle school a long time ago, and I took these very wealthy kids on the North Shore of Chicago out in the winter and just made them be still and kind of journal. And they had said they'd never been out in the cold. like these kids were so insulated and protected. So please, a plug for winter
Yeah.
and the beauty of winter.
Yeah, I really agree with that, and especially in the north, we have to embrace that because it's like 5 months of our school year, you know. I think winter is a wonderful place to learn academically, because there's some interesting things going on in winter that you don't get to experience, you know, water cycle phase changes and things like that. But aesthetically, it's really interesting. It really sort of, it's black and white, sort of, you know, in shades of gray, and that can be, in a way, very calming. The sounds are different. If you really examine yourself in nature mindfully in different seasons, you respond differently, and winter can be a really cool time to do that. So, yeah, plug for winter, I totally agree.